Often, the most deafening noise isn't the sound from outside, but the clamor of thoughts within our own heads. Reactive voices like, "Why was I silent just now? Do they think I'm weak? I have to get back at them." Emerge not because we don't know what to do, but because we fear losing control over how we're perceived. Yet, choosing to be silent doesn't mean defeat. In fact, it can be the highest form of victory, conquering oneself. Our culture often praises quick responses and the courage to speak up. However, true courage sometimes lies in stillness, in not retaliating, in remaining steadfast when insulted, staying true when misunderstood, and keeping calm when the world demands an emotional outburst. Calmness isn't about holding back. It's about understanding what's worth protecting and what's worth letting go. As Epictetus' philosophy suggests, don't let what is outside you control what is inside you. Let's delve into these 10 principles to understand when to respond and when to simply be silent with dignity. Principle 1. Steadfast purpose. We often get angry or waver not because the problem is big or the temptation is strong, but because we're unsure why we're holding back. Silence, patience, and non-retaliation only have meaning if we know what we're protecting. A clear purpose, no matter how small, makes the brain respond in a specific way. Self-reflection networks and emotional systems work in harmony, increasing prefrontal cortex activation, which helps regulate stress, weigh risks, and inhibit reactions. This happens because the body learns that there's something more important to safeguard, bringing the entire system to calm, not because of numbness, but because it realizes what's worth sacrificing. The world loves quick, visible achievements, but steadfastness is slow and sometimes unappealing to observe. Consistent people are often thought of as stubborn, when in fact they simply choose to stand firm even as the world's winds change direction. A sense of purpose, grown from consistent right action, keeps someone moving forward when others retreat. It's not about ego. It's about protecting something, even when no one is watching. Principle 2. Guarding the mind. We often feel tired or restless not because our bodies are weary, but because our minds are overwhelmed. Even without major problems, our heads are noisy with small, echoing voices. Our brains, particularly the default mode network, are never truly silent. They replay the past and plan the future, often adding unnecessary burdens. In an always connected era, keeping a clear mind feels like a luxury. We are conditioned to react quickly, losing presence and ultimately losing control. Epictetus said, "What enters your mind is your responsibility." Our brains have a biological tendency to be wary of negativity, once useful in the wild, now directed at notifications, gossip, or endless social expectations. Guarding the mind isn't about forcing positive thinking, but about choosing who and what is allowed to reside in your inner space. By observing your thoughts, you can see without being swept away, and that's the beginning of peace. Calmness doesn't mean emptiness. It's like a tranquil lake, where ripples don't dictate its surface. You can still think and respond, but you choose consciously. Managing your thoughts makes you less easily influenced because calmness is a decision. Principle 3. Addressing criticism. Often, what hurts us isn't the words themselves, but the presumed hidden intention behind them. Criticism feels intimidating because it knocks on the door of our deepest self-esteem, and we're unprepared to open it. Biologically, criticism can trigger the amygdala, perceived as a threat, causing the body to immediately defend itself. However, if we pause, listen, don't interrupt, don't immediately refute or take offense, and simply say, "Thank you, I'll think about that," we are activating the prefrontal cortex, taking control back from our ego. Hurtful criticism isn't necessarily wrong, and sweet flattery isn't always honest. Epictetus invites us to discern, not to reject everything nor to swallow everything whole. Criticism is sometimes not about you, but projection of someone else's unresolved pain. When you can be silent, not retaliate, not burn with anger. You are winning over your own ego. This can be trained, and each time you choose not to immediately respond, you are reshaping your nervous system. Principle 4, transforming offense. The feeling of being hurt by words that could be ignored often exhausts us. Offense rarely stems from the present moment. It usually triggers something much older, an unaddressed wound that lives on silently. If you observe closely when you feel offended, what are you actually protecting? Sometimes it's not your self-esteem, but the perfect, always calm, never wrong version of yourself that you wish to portray. When someone's comment touches that part, you feel threatened not by the words, but by your own idealized image. Neurologically, this is explainable. Every time you feel offended, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes active. The problem is, the amygdala can't differentiate between a physical threat and a threat to the ego. So, even a mild sarcasm can make your body react as if it's under real attack. In that moment, you have two choices: react or become aware. When you choose silence in the face of snide remarks, it's not out of fear, but because you know preserving your dignity doesn't require retaliation. Epictetus said, "We are not controlled by what others say, but by what we think about what they say." You always have the power not to let others' words penetrate too deeply. True strength isn't in an explosive response, but in deep control, born from the practice of seeing comments as opinions, not absolute truths. When you stop taking offense, you are, in fact, incredibly strong because you choose peace over conflict. Principle 5, overcoming fear and shame. There's a type of fear that's unheard but holds us back more strongly than bars, and a shame that's unspoken but silences us faster than punishment. Both are not just feelings, but subtle control systems that infiltrate how we live our lives. Have you ever been afraid to do something simple just because someone else was watching, or felt ashamed to reveal your vulnerable side because you were sure the world would mock you? This isn't a weakness. It's a sign you're still human. Our brains react to social fears in almost the same way as physical danger. The amygdala lights up, heart rate increases, even sweating, just from the fear of judgment. Shame is deep. It's not just blushing cheeks, but a biological reaction in the brain, involving the same areas as physical pain. That's why sometimes it's easier to fall down the stairs than to suffer a blow to our pride. But we're not here to avoid. As Epictetus said, fear and shame are opportunities not to be ridiculed, but to be silently conquered. Consider this. What would happen if you confronted your greatest fear, not by running, but by facing it, speaking about it, acknowledging it, and even letting others know you're scared? The effect is astonishing. The brain begins to rewire neural pathways that usually associate fear with threat, instead associating it with a safe-to-face challenge. This is like natural exposure therapy. The first time you tremble, the second you're still nervous, but eventually your body and mind learn that you can survive even when that feeling of shame arises. Of course, not everyone will understand, because being honest about fear isn't always praised. Often it's ridiculed. But precisely there, you find true strength. Not when you bravely appear strong, but when you dare to say, "I'm scared, but I'm still going." Because courage isn't about not having fear. It's about choosing the right path even when your knees are trembling. If you hold on to shame about the past or fear of rejection, it will become a wound that seeks its own outlet, often in anger, closed-off behavior, or loneliness. So the first step might be as simple as speaking, not to explain, but just acknowledge that you, too, are sometimes afraid, sometimes ashamed, but you're still here, still trying, still moving forward. And that is the quietest but most real form of courage. When you can live alongside fear and shame, you'll realize that when you're no longer controlled by those feelings, you're not just a resilient person. You become a free one. Principle 6, anticipating obstacles. Have you ever felt disappointed not because the problem was big, but because you expected everything to go smoothly. You hoped the path would be straight, and the slightest pebble made you stumble. Not because the pebble was sharp, but because you were unprepared. And there lies a subtle lesson. It's not the obstacles that weaken us, but the expectation that there shouldn't be any obstacles. If we're honest in the start, we know life is never promised to be free of disruptions. Epictetus even called obstacles part of the plan. Not accidents, not curses, but something you must encounter. It's ironic that when someone prepares a backup plan, they're often seen as pessimistic, when in fact it's a sign of realism, of not placing hope in an uncontrollable world. They choose to invest energy in things they can prepare for. The human brain naturally dislikes uncertainty. When there's a potential obstacle, whether real or imagined, our limbic system immediately activates, causing subtle tension, a slightly faster heartbeat, and the mind starts looking for the worst-case scenario. We call it anxiety, but it's actually just vigilance that hasn't been directed. Interestingly, when you start training yourself to welcome obstacles as part of the process, not only does your mental strength increase, but your nervous system also becomes more stable. Studies on proactive coping show that people who have anticipated potential problems are much calmer when those things actually happen, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they are prepared. Now imagine this. You make a plan, and in that plan you write, if I get rejected, I'll do A. If I fail at this point, I'll try B. Then you sleep soundly, and none of that happens. What's the lesson? You didn't lose anything. In fact, you won twice. First, you weren't surprised. Second, you knew that even if it did happen, you would be ready. This isn't about negative thinking, but about stopping the expectation that life will be soft just because your intentions are good. Life doesn't offer leniency just because you are sincere, but life will feel lighter if you're not too shocked when it challenges you. And ironically, sometimes when you approach a big change, obstacles appear the most, as if your inner system wants to test you. Are you sure you want to level up? If you're not ready, you might see those obstacles as a sign to give up. But if you're calm, you'll know this isn't a test to stop you, but to strengthen you. So now, ask yourself, what have you been avoiding out of fear of failure? What haven't you prepared for because you feel it would invite bad luck? Because perhaps by inviting the worst possibilities to the table, you can eat in peace, not because there are no problems, but because you already know what to do when problems arise. And that's a resilient person, not one who never faces a storm, but one who isn't shocked when the storm comes. Principle 7. Inner strength and how to respond. There's a moment that can determine the direction of your life. Not when you win, not when you lose, but when you choose how you respond. Someone can ruin your day with one sentence, or you can break the chain with a single smile. Inner strength is intriguing. It's not visible. It's not a loud voice, not a threat, not an expression of intense pressure. Instead, inner strength is silent, yet not empty. Silent because it no longer needs validation. Have you ever seen someone who becomes even calmer when faced with pressure? They don't react, don't defend, don't run, but also don't avoid. They just stand, listen, then offer a faint smile and carry on with their life. Behind that, something incredibly powerful is at work. Their cortex is taking over their emotional system, not because they are indifferent, but because they have finished a small internal war within themselves. When you choose not to react to insults or get drawn into drama, it's not a cold demeanor. It's a sign that you no longer allow others to push your emotional button so easily. You realize that you are the sole holder of the remote control. In such moments, you are not being passive. You are actively choosing a healthier, more conscious, and more mature path. Some people will call you weak because in a world busy proving strength through quick reactions and fierce retaliation, calmness is often misinterpreted. But you know that silence is precious because you have to sacrifice your ego to maintain control. At a biological level, When you delay a reaction by just 5 seconds, your brain has the opportunity to shift the processing from the limbic system to the logical control center. You create space to choose, and that space, however small, is freedom. Now imagine this. You're under pressure. Someone accuses you, interrupts you, or even corners you. But you don't immediately respond. You take a breath. You label your feeling. I'm angry, but I won't explode. And in those few seconds, you become a truly different person from your old self. That is inner strength. Not about how much you can endure, but about how consciously you respond. And ironically, the more you practice this, the more people will start to lower their voices in your presence. Not because they're afraid, but because they can sense that you are not playing on a level of reaction. You are playing on a level of control. So, the question is, when was the last time you chose not to retaliate to preserve your own peace? Because it could be that it's not the bad events that destroy you, but how you respond to them without control. And it's also possible that your life will feel lighter when you realize that the only thing you need to master is not the outside world, but yourself, one response at a time. Principle 8, self-restraint in action. What you don't do can save you more than anything you do. We live in a culture that idolizes speed, quick responses, instant answers, impulsive decisions, as if those who deliberate are slow. Yet, that's precisely where true strength lies. We forget that the ability to restrain ourselves, not to retaliate when emotions surge, not to speak when the tongue itches, not to act when impulse boils over, is a hidden victory. It's a victory that isn't celebrated, but builds the most solid foundation of character. When you choose silence amidst anger, your brain is working quietly. The prefrontal cortex suppresses the amygdala, and the limbic system, usually prone to explosions, begins to yield. This isn't because you're scared, but because you know not every feeling needs to be converted into action. Imagine someone in a major conflict. The other party is shouting, attacking, provoking, and this person simply stares, neither retaliating nor fleeing. They just stand whole, seemingly passive, but internally, they are performing an extraordinary inner work. That's not weakness. It's invisible discipline. Interestingly, when we choose to restrain our reactions, we lose nothing. On the contrary, we conserve energy because all hasty, emotional actions are always costly, whether in terms of time, reputation, or relationships. More often, the things we regret in life aren't because we were too silent, but because we were too quick. If only I hadn't sent that message right away. Or, if only I could take those words back. These regrets arise from moments when we were overcome by impulse, not from major decisions. Now, the question is, if you knew that by delaying 5 seconds you could save a relationship, if you knew that by taking 2 breaths you could de-escalate an argument, why do you still feel that self-restraint is a weakness? Perhaps because the world is too noisy. Too many impulses tell you that if you're silent, you lose. But not every battle requires a fight. Sometimes all you need is the strength to weather the storm without shouting. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens that harms us, but how we react to it." And not reacting is the highest form of control itself. But of course, it's not easy. Self-restraint is hard because there's no applause, no instant recognition. Only you and that small voice inside your heart that knows, I could act, but I choose not to. And if you're consistent, every moment of delay will strengthen you, just like a muscle. The power of self-restraint can also be trained, and gradually you'll become someone who is not easily provoked, not easily swayed, not easily lost, because you know there's a nobler tension than exploding, the ability to stand calm even when the whole world invites you to join the commotion. Principle 9, the power of acceptance. There's a simple phrase that takes a lifetime to truly utter. Yes, I accept, not out of weakness, nor surrender, but because at a certain point you realize that continuously fighting a reality, you cannot change will only slowly weaken you. We are often taught to keep fighting, never to stop, never to be satisfied. But not all resistance leads to victory, and not all acceptance means defeat. Imagine losing something important in your life, a person, an opportunity, a hope, and you sit quietly, not angry, not blaming. You simply nod softly, say in your heart, I don't like this, but I know it's happening. That's a rare moment where inner strength emerges in a very subtle form, acceptance. And precisely there, you begin to free yourself. The acceptance meant here isn't passive resignation. It's not a lack of direction. Instead, it's a reorganization of energy from forcing change on something beyond your control to focusing on what you can reach, yourself. In many cases, a significant loss. When someone chooses not to blame anyone, a year later they often not only recover but grow. This is called post-traumatic growth. When you stop wrestling with reality, you open up inner space for new things to enter. You become more sensitive, more honest with yourself, and strangely more peaceful. Acceptance creates space in your mind, space previously filled with anger, guilt, or the urge to control everything. And once that space opens, you begin to see new possibilities that were hidden behind the smoke of ego. Interestingly, the body also responds. Research shows that people who practice acceptance experience reduced stress, lower cortisol levels, and a more stable immune system. This means that even biologically, the body knows that fighting things beyond control is unhealthy. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't strive. Acceptance doesn't mean stopping movement. Rather, by accepting existing reality, you can move more clearly without unnecessary emotional baggage. Imagine if, from childhood, we were taught that not everything has to be won, but everything can be experienced with a heart ready to accept. How many unnecessary wounds will we avoid carrying into adulthood? Now, reflect on this. What are the things you are currently still fighting, even though you know they are beyond your control? What would happen if you stopped fighting and accepted, not as a form of defeat, but as a first step toward harmony? Because when you accept, you're actually creating space. Space for calm, space for growth, space to become a more complete version of yourself. And perhaps your greatest strength isn't when you fight the world, but when you nod, face reality, and say in your heart, okay, I accept. Now I will move forward again. Principle 10. Living in harmony with nature. Have you ever felt tired, not from lack of sleep, but because something inside felt heavy, like a quiet voice within your body telling you, you're too far from yourself? In a life constantly accelerating, from notifications and schedules to ambitions and endless validation, we slowly drift away from the rhythm that has existed since the beginning. Nature's rhythm, the body's rhythm. Epictetus called it living in harmony with nature. This doesn't mean you have to move to the mountains, live in the forest, and quit your job. Nor does it mean you should reject progress. But are you aware that our bodies and minds were not designed for the speed we live at today? When humans force themselves to move continuously without natural pauses, the body becomes confused, the brain loses the ability to respond slowly, emotions easily flare up, and eventually we become reactive, not reflective. Ironically, all other creatures live without this pressure. Trees grow unhurriedly. Water flows without competition. The sky is never busy explaining itself, yet provides space for us. So why are we, the only thinking beings, losing our way by chasing something that doesn't necessarily bring us peace? Many studies confirm this. Daily exposure to nature, even just 15 minutes a day, can lower cortisol, increase concentration, and improve mood. Biophilia research even shows that we have a fundamental yearning, a longing to reconnect with the rhythm of the earth. And perhaps that's why when you open a window, breathe in the morning air, or simply listen to the sound of rain, you feel a small sense of calm for no reason, without explanation. You feel more whole, Living in harmony with nature isn't about resignation or inaction. It's about knowing when to move and when to stop, knowing that not every decision needs to be instantaneous, and sometimes the wisest course is not to speed up, but to adjust your rhythm. Perhaps you felt restless without cause. It could be because you've been disconnected from your body's true rhythm for too long, and the peace you seek everywhere only appears when you realign with nature and with yourself. Consider this. If all social systems collapse today, internet gone, jobs chaotic, economy crumbling, who would adapt the fastest? Not the wealthiest, but those most capable of returning to basics, who know how to live simply, who don't panic when everything feels slow, because they have long learned to live in meaningful silence. And when you think about it, perhaps that's what makes someone strong. Not because they have all the answers, but because they understand when to be silent, when to feel, and when simply to be. So perhaps what you need isn't a new strategy, but a new rhythm, and it might just be the old rhythm you've long forgotten. Conclusion: stillness is the beginning of strength. Imagine for a moment. What if the strength you've been searching for everywhere has actually been hidden in the simplest of things, stillness? Not an empty stillness, nor a frightening silence, but profound, full stillness that subtly introduces you to yourself. We live in a noisy era. We're accustomed to responding to everything, answering everything, vocalizing everything. Yet, ironically, the more we vocalize, the further we drift from our own inner voice. And perhaps you felt it too. When all screens are off, notifications stop, conversations cease, and suddenly you sit alone in the quiet. There arises a strange sensation, either comfort or fear, because for the first time, you truly meet yourself. Not everyone is ready for that. Stillness isn't for those who are running away, but for those brave enough to look within and not flee hastily. There's an interesting point. Neuroscience studies show that regular stillness, even just 5 minutes a day, can lower blood pressure, slow heart rate, and activate brain regions responsible for emotional control and decision-making. It's not just calming, it's strengthening. It's no wonder many great people are calm. They aren't trapped by the desire to prove themselves, nor tempted to constantly perform, because they already know the strongest place in the world, within themselves. They can laugh genuinely without envy, be silent without defeat, walk without needing to be seen, because they know the world can do as it pleases. But as long as their inner core is solid, nothing can shake them. And you can be like that too. It doesn't mean you have to withdraw from life, but you can start to create space. Not to be silent forever, but so your inner voice has a place to speak. Perhaps you can start with something small. Turn off your screen, take a breath, sit quietly for 5 minutes, and allow your body and mind to return to their most basic rhythm. At first, it might be uncomfortable, but gradually you will begin to recognize that in silence lies the most important conversation of your life. We often chase many things to feel alive, when true life sometimes emerges when we pause, when we're no longer busy proving and begin to simply feel. So, if you truly want to be strong, start with one simple thing. Learn to be silent without losing yourself. Silent not because you know nothing, but because you know not everything needs a response. Not every emotion needs to be reciprocated, and not every commotion needs to be fought. Stillness is not an end, but a beginning. The beginning of a resilient inner self, a clear mind and a soul that is not easily swayed.